Welcome everybody to our gathering today. Thank you very much for coming out on this rainy morning. My name is Christian Christensen. I'm professor of journalism at Stockholm University. I'm a member of the MeCoDEM project, and we'd like to welcome everybody to our gathering here today to discuss media, conflict, and democratization, where we will be discussing and presenting some of the results and some of the ideas from three European Union funded projects related around the general theme of media and democratization and conflict. Just a few housekeeping rules. I don't intend on spending too much time. The first one is that there is Wi-Fi here in the building. I know a lot of people are interested in that. I think there are some of these flyers around the wall. There's one actually right there by the speaker, here on this wall right here, this black speaker. And the code is there, and the password. A couple of other housekeeping notes. We have a fairly full schedule today up until 12 o'clock, and from 12 o'clock on we have a gathering here for a small lunch and a discussion afterward. I'll be acting as the chair throughout the session, but just a couple of notes that first of all, we will be streaming the meeting today, video streaming. So if there's anybody that is uncomfortable, has a problem with that, or would rather not be filmed in any way, please notify us or myself or Walid, who is sitting here. I would also note that one of our speakers today, Lucinda, during Lucinda Armstrong's speech, we will be operating under what we might think of as Chatham House rules, which is essentially no tweeting, no quoting, no texting of the material as it's presented, and we won't be streaming that particular portion of the talk. But otherwise, we will be streaming. We have a break today at around 10:45 after an introduction from our three project leaders. So I don't intend on spending too much more time. If you have any questions, please ask myself during the gathering or Walid Al-Sakaf, who is sitting here, who many of you have been in contact with. And so I'd just like to go straight in and welcome our three project leaders to introduce the three projects, and we will be hearing more about them as the day goes on, and I hope we can have an interesting and a fruitful discussion about a topic that I think, based upon the turnout today, is evidently very important and one that stimulates a lot of conversation, is extremely topical given political events. So I would like to begin
just
by
one quick note about the hashtag. ICT conflict.
ICT conflict is the Twitter hashtag for our gathering today. Walid is very savvy on the tweet.
You might as well do it.
I am as well, but I think ICT conflict.
Yes,
right. Thank you. Well, I'd like to begin by welcoming Professor Katrin Boltmer, who is the head of the MeCoDEM project, which I am a part of from the University of Leeds. So Katrin, welcome, and perhaps you'd like to discuss the project.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Today we will focusing on a particular aspect of various projects, three projects actually, which exist in parallel at the moment, all of them funded by the European Union. Two of them in the seventh framework program, which is now turned into something with a nice title, Horizon 2020. And VOX-Pol is a network that maybe you will say something more about it. So since we are looking at a very specific aspect of these projects today, I thought we give a brief overview of the projects as a whole so you can see the elephant and not just sort of the ear. So MeCoDEM stands for Media, Conflict and Democratization. Just a moment. Behind it is the idea that over the last quarter of a century we have seen a huge rise in demands for democratization, also transitions to democratization around the world, but against the assumption that democratization brings more peace, both domestically and internationally, we see quite often the contrary. So democratization often triggers conflicts, and this is sort of the starting idea here, that what we call democratization conflicts. So in our research we distinguish between sort of four clusters of conflicts actually. One is conflicts which are related to the distribution and control of power, accountability and responsiveness. Another conflict is related to citizenship, sort of demands for extended participation, but also all these conflicts around identity, in group identity, which comes up post-transition. A third issue we are interested in is transitional justice, which raises issues about how to address the past in transgressions of human rights. And a fourth cluster, which is actually not listed here, I simply forgot it, is slightly different. It's elections, because elections in the literature are often regarded as the moments where these conflicts often explode, if you like, and you have quite often situations of post-conflict violence. So political scientists have addressed these issues, even though I think they haven't really spread very much in the community. But what we want to do in our project is to address these issues from a communication perspective. And this is basically the innovation, I would say, of this project. So we are arguing that conflicts are always communication events which are played out in the public arena. So from that perspective, we are arguing that it is not just the media, even though the media are highlighted in the title of the project, but we have to look at the communication practices of a broad range of stakeholders involving political activists, civil society groups, governments, political authorities, often religious authorities. So we are looking more at communication rather than just the media. So therefore, conflicts are regarded as mediated events which are transformed by the media, whether they are traditional media or new media, and thereby sort of change their nature and their dynamic. And therefore, the conclusion from this is that an important part of conflict resolution has to be communication-based. Just briefly, we are doing field work in four countries, sort of in a south-north direction. It's South Africa, Kenya, Egypt, and Serbia. And in terms of broader topics, we are looking at media representations, journalistic ethics, civil society and political activism and their communication practices, governance and communication capacity and conflict management, sort of taking a top-down perspective, and ICTs and democratization conflicts. And this is basically what the presentations are about today. So it's just a small slice of the bigger cake. In our overall approach, we are taking what is called a comparative case study design, meaning we have selected a set of 3 to 4 key conflicts in each of our countries, which fall into these types of conflicts I mentioned before. And here you can briefly see a kind of overview of the conflicts we are looking at. And again, today we are looking only at one of these 12 conflicts, which is highlighted in bold letters. This is a conflict which came up in South Africa in 2015 around the State of the Nation address of President Zuma, which we have used to develop a social media tool to analyze dynamics of communication. So just to finish this is a list of everybody who is, not everybody who is involved, the institutions who are involved, and the people who are leading these different work packages, as it is called in European speak. And behind it, of course, are big groups and teams of great people. Sort of at the moment, it's probably something between 40 and 50. I'm losing sort of the overview of it. So it's overall quite a big project, and sort of today the focus will be on our research, which specifically deals with social media and the dynamic which sort of comes out of social media in these kind of conflicts. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kasia. Now the word to Dimitra Kopolo from INFOCORE. who's got a name I feel very strongly about. My name is Christian Christensen. So present, please, welcome, and present your project. Get it?
and a warm welcome, and thank you, Catherine, for inviting us as a project in this very interesting workshop. It's actually a very happy coincidence that we're here because just yesterday we had the final conference of INFOCORE, and as we speak we have the last meeting as a project consortium, so it's kind of two different things happening in parallel. Yesterday we have the final conference when most of our research members developed and presented their findings at this stage, and it was a weird feeling because it was supposed to be the final conference, but we felt that the real work actually begins because we have so much data that we have collected, we have such a complex structure, so we will have many more things to come. So I'm having this introduction on behalf of Professor Romy Fröhlich, who is the project coordinator of INFOCORE, and here she is. She's at our meeting at the moment, so I'm holding the introduction on her behalf. So I would like to provide you with a brief overview of what our project is doing within the same FP7 funding. So INFOCORE stands for Informing Conflict Prevention, Response and Resolution, the role of media in violent conflict. And this has proven to be a very aspiring objective to study how different media respond to violent conflict cases. And you can see here the different institutions that are involved in this project. But of course, behind the institutions, it's important to kind of present you the people behind it. But we have grown since we started in 2014, and now we have approximately 35 members who are working in different parts of the project. And the ones who were here also yesterday have already met some of these people. So these are the different conflict cases that we focus on. We have 6 different conflicts, so we aspire to kind of provide a holistic and comparative approach, focusing on different kinds of conflicts and in different conflict regions. We have the Middle East region, the Balkans, and the Great Lakes cases, Burundi and DRC. So while we are focusing on in different conflict phases, we collect data from almost 8 to 10 years. So we kind of want to study the different conflict phases as they were, as the conflicts were fueling, when they were attempts for reconciliation and peace negotiations. So you can see that according to the conflict, we have a larger time span that we focus on. Also, we focus on different kinds of media produced in different styles and manners. We have social media and traditional media, let's say, so that we can kind of distinguish both, focus ranging from print, TV, radio, and online. And we focus both on local, transnational, and foreign media. Also, what we want to focus on are the different actors that are involved in the conflicts. So an important distinction is that our project is divided in 2 main strands. We have the interview work packages who are doing field work and work mainly doing interviews for focus groups and surveys. And at the same time, we have the content analytic group, which and in this group we have 4 different work packages who deal with media-related content, both from ranging from traditional media, social media, strategic communication, and also parliamentary debates. So our aim is to kind of develop the key interactions between the roles of the media. So we have developed a kind of sophisticated interactive design between the different work packages and the work package leaders. We have at the moment more than 300 qualitative interviews, we have opinion surveys, and dozens of focus groups. So here you can see the different people who work on strategic communication and PR discourse, social media, news discourse, and the parliamentary debates. So for the content analytic part, we relied largely to automated content analysis, and then the different groups decided to focus on different qualitative approaches so that they complement the quantitative part. And what is important also to stress is that we rely to a great extent to our relations with our stakeholders. We had two large stakeholders meetings here in Brussels. The one it was in October last year, and the last one was 2 days before, so this week. And we also held 3 different stakeholders seminars in the different conflict regions. So we had one in Cyprus to cover the Middle East region. We had one in Ohrid to cover the Balkan region, and then we had one in Goma focusing on the African cases. So what we try to do during the stakeholders workshop is to try to discuss the interpretations, but from the practitioner's perspective, and give different priorities to our research objectives according to the feedback that we got from our stakeholders. So what we try to do is to try to integrate different perspectives on the roles of media based also from what was discussed during these meetings. So here's our website if you would like to follow what's being published so far, and there is a lot more to come. We also have a Facebook group that you can also join and follow our work, and also we have a Twitter account that we have also been quite active in it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dimitra. And can everybody hear me in the back also?
You can turn on.
Oh, it's off. That definitely helps that situation. So I'm also looking at the time here. So we haven't done a formal presentation, which I'll do later in my talk today. So I will give a brief verbal introduction of the work of VOX-Pol. So hello everybody, and thank you for coming, and it's nice to see a full house here, which doesn't happen very often. So I suppose Brussels has that kind of unique characteristics to it. So I'm a research fellow for the VOX-Pol network, which is a network on violent online political extremism. And it's a collaboration of different universities across Europe that look at different issues of violent extremism online. So it includes the University of Amsterdam, Central European University, the Intra-Prussia Institute of Technology in Delhi, the University of Oxford, University of College of London, University of Hamburg, the Center for Peace and Security Studies, and King's College, the Center for War Studies and War and Security Studies, and TNO. So it's a collaboration of researchers who each look at violent online political extremism from many different perspectives. And I'll be presenting some of the kind of sample work that we have been doing. So it's a 5-year funded EC Framework 7 program, and it's coordinated by Dublin City University. So some of the things that we have already been doing in the framework is things like trying to broaden the understanding of violent online political extremism, to go beyond the very simplistic understanding of violent jihadism only, to look at all kinds of other groups, and deepening the understanding to go into interview surveys, online ethnographies, and also looking at big-scale, big data methods and cross-platform and multilingual methods, and also develop interdisciplinary approaches to looking at the issue of violent online political extremism, and also developing all kinds of different tools. But because I think we are very close to our keynote presentation, So some of the work, I'll very briefly just introduce some of the kind of questions that we have been working with VOX-Pol, and then some of these will be chronicled or detailed more in the presentation that I'll give later today. So the questions include things like the ethics and politics of researching violent online political extremism, assessing the challenges of responding to it and the ethics of responding to it, critiquing the discourse of violent online political extremism, and critiquing some methods such as terrorism informatics and social network analysis, also trying to see how this can be used for research. So there's been work done on assessing the ethics and politics of policing the internet for extreme material and assessing global legislative responses to violent online political extremism and questions of corporate responsibility, and also all kinds of issues linked to policy and practical things. So what VOX-Pol is involved in is it involves organizing conferences, organizing training academics both for the police and the security services, but also for researchers. Also summer schools bringing young researchers in, and also lunch briefing series that took place in Brussels this year. There's a quarterly newsletter, a blog, and there's quite a substantial online library for some of the material and the work and the research that have been done and collected. And there's also an researcher online mobility program. However, because I will talk about this more in detail later today, so I will leave this presentation at this, and we'll get looking forward to seeing the keynote speech. Thank you.
Thank you to our three project leaders. Wael, would you like to stand here, or would you like to sit when you... Your decision. Well, I'd just like to introduce the first of our two keynote speakers, both of whom we're very, very lucky to have with us today. I'll begin by introducing Wael Abbas. Those of us who've been looking at the use of social media and internet for activism for some amount of time will be familiar with our next speaker, someone who is an early user, one might say, particularly of YouTube. Someone who's had his accounts shut down, which is often a sign that you might be doing something good, or not. But also someone who was recognized at a fairly early stage, I would say, in popular terms, as someone who leveraged this use of social media into influence. And I think that you were, for example, Middle East Person of the Year with CNN in 2006 at a very early stage. We're thinking in relative terms here. We're talking about a decade ago. Describe yourself as a blogger and a journalist, but would also say an activist. And so we're very, very lucky to have Wael come here today and speak to us about, I guess, your thoughts about the topic in general, maybe a little bit about his own work in Egypt. So I don't want to spend too much more time and take it away from us. So I'd just like to welcome Wael Abbas, and thank you very much for joining us today and presenting some of your ideas and the discussion of your work. Thank you.
My pleasure. Good morning. I'm Wael Abbas. I'm a blogger first, and then a journalist, and sometimes I'm an activist, or maybe when I'm online, it's all the time I'm an activist. In 2004, there were a movement that was formed calling for change in Egypt. It was called Kifaya, which means enough. This movement had a coalition of different political parties and organizations in Egypt, and they had activities on the streets. But the problem that they had was coverage. They didn't have enough media coverage. The traditional media would ignore them because they don't want to get into trouble with the authorities. That's when the bloggers came in handy. We had a phenomenon in Egypt called political bloggers, and they started covering the activities of the opposition in the Egyptian streets and allowing them to be available for the people online to see pictures and videos and know what happened exactly, because they don't otherwise get this kind of information from the traditional media. But then again, if, for example, I was covering an illustration and I got arrested and they confiscated my camera, the videos and the photos will be lost and I will not be able to tell the story. So we needed something that was like live, that can send information instantly. We tried using mobile phone SMS messages. It was very costly. We were only able to send to a few people who are our friends, our network. We had a sit-in in Tahrir Square 2006. That's like 5 years before the revolution, and it was the first of its kind. And we tried to cover it live on our blogs using mobile phones. My colleague Ala Abdel Fattah, who is in prison now, by the way, he was a programmer and he was able to send messages from his mobile phone to his blog that can be available instantly of what's going on in Tahrir. He was able to say that, okay, the police are surrounding us, they are spraying water to in the garden in the middle of the square, so that to make stuff not comfortable for us to stay there, and this kind of stupid stuff that security does. It worked for some time, but we need something more. And then Twitter appeared. I think it was 2007, and we all joined. And back then it was able to send messages to people's phones. So we were able to spread the word through our page on the internet, our Facebook, our Twitter page, and also to people's pockets in their own pockets. But some activists had a lot of followers, which made it hard for Twitter to send messages to all these people, and because it costed them money. I was told once that by some official from Twitter that any message I send, it will cost them like $100, because I had a lot of followers back then. So eventually Twitter has changed. It lost this edge of sending directly to your mobile phone, but with the appearance of smartphones, you were able to have the application on your phone and be notified of what's going on. And it also added the features of uploading photos, uploading videos, putting links of live broadcasting if you are covering a demonstration on the street or something like that. But still, the network on Twitter was limited to the people who know you, who want to follow you, who want to hear news about you. But when Facebook appeared, we had this feature of having groups. The groups attracted a lot of people who wanted to follow and who can take action in large numbers. It started in 2008 with the 6th of April movement that called for a general strike in Egypt. And it wasn't successful, but the group managed to have hundreds of thousands of members in this group. So you can imagine the power that you have when sending a message to this huge number of people. The movement, the group has become a movement. And this movement was very useful during the revolution, with a huge group of people on all the governors of Egypt all over the country. And we had this Khalid Said also page. Khalid Said was a victim of torture in Alexandria in Egypt, and a page was created in his name, and this page was run by Wael Abbas. I think you heard about him. And this page had like 1 million followers or something, which has increased after the revolution, of course. So this page was able to organize demonstrations in several places around Egypt, and it led to the revolution of the 25th of January. After the revolution, things changed a little bit. We had a lot of work to do on the internet. There were demonstrations on the streets, there were workers' strikes, there was violence. We used Twitter and Facebook to spread information, to broadcast live videos of what was going on. We informed those who can do anything, that somebody got arrested or somebody got killed, or that we need supplies, we need medicine, we need lawyers, for example, if somebody is at the hands of the police. But the Muslim Brotherhood and the regime itself, the old regime or the deep state as they call it, realized that this tool is very dangerous, and they decided to utilize it themselves. So they started what we call electronic committees. It's something like the Chinese click farms. But what they do is that they spread false information. They attack specific persons or specific accounts. They try to disable them or make them go offline or stop them. So it became a full-blown war on the internet after the revolution. With the Muslim Brotherhood in power, there was this sentiment in the street of hate towards them and their policies. So there was a movement that was also formed online, but not a lot of people knew that this movement was formed by the deep state or the old regime, which is Tamarrud. And Tamarrud succeeded in collecting a lot. I cannot deny that they were successful in collecting a huge number of signatures that that called for impeaching the Morsi, the Ikhwani or the Muslim Brotherhood president, which resulted in a military coup on the 30th of June 2013. And afterwards, we found out that the freedoms that we have acquired and the success that we were able to make is being taken from us gradually. They started arresting people who have powerful pages on Facebook, people who have powerful accounts on Twitter, silencing everybody. Lots of journalists and media people like Bassem Youssef, maybe you heard about him, they lost their jobs, left the country, or they are living in jail at the moment. And it's almost silent on the internet now, almost, but not completely. And people go to jail for stupid stuff like we have a new accusation that can lead somebody to go to jail, which is you are demoralizing the people or you are spreading an atmosphere of skepticism, which is not acceptable now in Egypt after a revolution. That's the way the military see it. So as I said, it's not completely silent, but it's not really successful except in exposing what the regime does. A lot of people have learned the techniques that only the bloggers and the activists were using. We've seen a few days ago this graphic video of this the fisherman or the man who sells fish who was tortured in a police station and sodomized. And this video was shot by an ordinary citizen, and it was available online, and it's creating a lot of controversy in Egypt at the moment. But to come back to the point, like the success that we have before the revolution success, that will enable you to enforce change in Egypt, we need a lot of work. We need new techniques to make changes. The old techniques the regime has realized their power and try to shut them down, but we need to find something new. We need to find new techniques to be able to overcome this and return to the state where there was democracy and freedom, which was very turbulent time after the revolution, but it was better than we have now. Only one voice, propaganda all the time. And that's all I have.
You have 5 minutes more if you want to.
We can save it to
Can I
discussion.
save it for discussion? Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Yeah, sure. Discussion is always good.
Stay
Actually,
where
stay
you
there a
are.
while. Thank you.
We're going to stop the transmission.
just
You
stop
can announce that.
Yes,
So that
we'll be stopping the streaming. So, welcome Lucinda Armstrong, very warm welcome, policy officer from the EC DG Home, who will also be discussing some of the project and their presentation. So. And I think that the relationship to the project will become clear in their presentation. So, Malik, welcome.
Thank you. First, let me say how delighted I am for the full house, and apologize for those who are watching.
Chatham House is off.
Yeah, I mean you can't really tweet, especially in my case. So what I'll be doing now is taking you through my presentation. Yeah, so the presentation I'll be giving is basically in terms of providing you with some introduction into a tool that has been created. This tool is an open source tool for extracting and analyzing tweets. And it's part of the Work Package 7, WP7. I think you're already familiar with these terms if you're in the EU funding space. And it's basically in terms of understanding the role of ICTs and democratization during conflicts. Well, I'll give you a quick background of why the tool was created. First, we'd like to emphasize that the internet has enabled media content production on an unprecedented scale. You see that already, there's really no question. And this would obviously have resulted in a huge amount of big data. And so, in order to understand the use of ICTs, we have such as tools such as Twitter. We actually need to find ways of analyzing and using and extracting and dealing with this amount of big data. Just to illustrate a point, this is a quote I like, which says that, yes, but loads of people are still treating the concept of big data as something they can choose to ignore, when actually they're about to be run over by the stream law that is big data. And it's a fact in reality that many researchers are still struggling to cope with the need to deal with this phenomenon, particularly as media researchers have been using former methods of dealing with, let's say, clip hits, trying to extract quotes, qualitative assessment of data, and using tools that might be a bit difficult to continue with given the mass amount of data. And so a typical problem we usually face is the usability and the technical skill requirements. And the problem is even worse when it comes to the areas where you have limited, let's say, leadership or vision within certain areas of research where they say we can try to utilize old ways to deal with new technology, and that's not possible. So there are a number of tools available, but many of them cost money. Some are closed source, and then the idea of usability is really key here. How can you deal with research and try to do research if you're really not able to properly use the software? It's not usable. There's a term called usable technology that's becoming really a hindrance for using technologies for the betterment of research. So instead of relying on others, we decided to go our own path and decided we'd like to establish our own tool. And the need was basically, as they say, need is the mother of invention. So we ended up using available libraries, finding time and fine-tuning them to meet the requirements of our researchers in MeCoDEM. It's been a year-long project to start with. I recall the first day when I managed to get into the project, the program, I actually said, why not develop something from scratch, basically to help us extract, analyze, and visualize tweets. And the idea was that we have particular conflicts in Egypt, Serbia, and South Africa, and Kenya. And then the amount of the tweets was in the hundreds of thousands, and researchers would actually see that and say, often give up or try to take only a small fraction, a sample. And furthermore, the idea was to have this as an open source solution so that once we're done, this is open to the world, we can have other researchers utilize it, and it would be available to all. A particular example of what it could do is basically use Twitter as a source of data. Some questions that the tool can answer is identify the most tweeted and favorited tweets about a particular hashtag. In this case, we took the SONA, which is State of the Nation Address of South Africa in 2015, which my colleague Heather will explain more in depth later. But it basically was a State of the Union. It was an event that triggered some sort of infighting within the parliament, physical world, and removal of some parliamentarians. And so it led to some huge backlash on social media. You can see that happening, unfolding before you on Twitter. But then, how do you take this into analyzing it and trying to make the best out of it? The second question could be possibly, let's identify the particular videos, images, or links that have been used within this dialogue on Twitter. What has been shared most frequently, what has been retweeted most frequently. And then we can also actually compare web and mobile usage of tweeters during this period. How did they compare in terms of usage? And then there's another aspect of the Twitter sphere, which is basically the users themselves. How are they interrelated? How do users interact among themselves? So the first 3 questions would be about content. The fourth would be about the producers of the content. How do they actually interact? So let me take you to a quick demo of the tool. And by the way, it's now open source. If you go to GitHub, this is the tool. It's available, downloadable. You can actually begin to use it right away. All you need to have is a server and some pretty standard software such as PHP, Apache, and also these standard things that come on any Linux box. And in fact, I used my own Macintosh as a server as well, and it works. Just yesterday I demonstrated, just to make sure that everything is fine. So, in fact, if we go now and do a demo, you can actually use this username and password, demo@MeCoDEM. And so these are a couple of 3 examples of cases that we've developed, but let's take the SONA case. So this is the interface, very simple, no data to put in, nothing. All you need to do is add a case. Adding a case is basically putting an ID, name, and then choosing what format, what way of data extraction you get, and then put in the query. And so I did that in advance, and it took around, I think it would take about an hour to get all the tweets about a particular case. And once it's ready, you can actually begin to plot it. And voila, this is the case. This is the tweets that happened within the period from the 1st, I think the 2nd till the 12th of February in 2015. That's the beginning of the SONA. It was the announcement by the president saying that, okay, we have now the State of the Nation address, and we'd like to get input from people. So you can tell this is the timeline. It shows how many tweets and retweets have been there during this period. You require no real knowledge of what code there is, it's involved and everything, but then it's open source, so we can also investigate and see how it works. So the beauty of this is that it allows you to do many things. First, it allows you to zoom in and see minute by minute or hour by hour what tweets have been there. So this is tweet activity, retweet activity. You can, in fact, look into the hash cloud, what were the hashtags that were used around this topic. Then you can see the timeline of tweets. You can also sort them based on the amount of retweets. So you get the most retweeted topics and discussion. You can also see the most interactive session, something that had gained interest. So for example, right here we have the presidency of South Africa, that's the official account, asking what would you like President Zuma to say? And so what happens here is that you get a number of responses here, and if you click on the responses, you actually begin to see what happened, what was the dialogue that took place. You see direct responses, user replies, mentions, etc. So some of them are quite funny. Where is he paying back the money is the response. And so it's interesting that I'm not sure if they realize they opened Pandora's box when they ask for comments. But this is the beauty of social media, everyone is free to speak their mind. So the tool allows you to do this to any case, to any hashtags. Then you can also have a huge number of filters. You can specify if it's an image, video, link, if it's from a verified user, if it's been a response, any hashtags, any keywords from particular users. So there's a manual of about 20 pages that you can look online to find exactly what you need and how to use it. And so once you begin to familiarize yourself with this, you'll find that it really helps you digest what's really happening in the cybersphere. What languages have been used, what source tools have been used to launch. For example, I'd like to know the web-based applications, let's say users who use the web to post. So this is the web activity. But I also like to compare this with the mobile activity. So I'll click on mobile, and then there's this overlay option. So you click on that, and you actually see the overlay of web and mobile. You see here there's a huge difference. Mobile activity was much higher in terms of success. So that gives you an understanding of how web was used at one instance and when it wasn't used. There's also a possibility to look into the most shared, most retweeted videos or images. For example, like to see what has been shared the most. This guy, Zuma, the president, well, obviously. So you can have a look and see, and then you'd actually be able to look into who actually among the tweeters was the one who posted this and who used it. So this is a list of people who used the image. So it's a lot of possibilities to navigate and look and investigate. And I think Heather has gone through the process of helping me find bugs and clearing the code. So I'm really thankful to her and Lonnie and other colleagues. So this is one aspect, and we've now just dealt with the content side. Then we have an interesting area, which is the tweeters. Who are these people who are tweeting about this? So you can actually select a case and see the most, let's say, the 10 highest, most tweeters, most frequent tweeters. So you get the list of most frequent tweeters, and you get to understand who they are, their bios, where they're located, all the information, which is public because it's an API on Twitter. You get to understand the influence they may have on your network. So this is in terms of tweets. You can have them in terms of retweets, and you can also see the highest number of followers. Who are the most important, most recognized figures who are discussing this? So you find news, for example, that are most visible because they have the highest number of followers and individuals, etc. And then within each of those, you can actually tweet, click on this, and you get to the actual tweets of that individual. So you go back and forth, you move around, you navigate. Everything is done locally on your server, so it's no longer to do with Twitter. And then there's something that might be interesting to a number. By the way, we did an analysis of MeCoDEM's own tweets, and this might be interesting. And we actually realized that Wael Abbas was the highest person with 300,000+ followers. Everyone else was in the 20,000. So you can see he gave us a good boost in publicity. And so let's say you'd like to see something else which is called network analysis, social network analysis. This is really the captivating side of what we try to do. So we'd like to see the responses among people. So if we plot the map, these are the interesting people are working around Twitter. And this center figure is the presidency. And you can move it here. If you move it around, actually, everyone sticks to it. And there's one connection to connect to the others, and it's the parliament. So you can see how isolated this is. And the only link is the parliament. So it tells a lot of how they're structured, their interaction is structured. And there are then a few that are responding to each other. But this is about replies, which is a feature on Twitter that allows you to see who's replying to. And if you click on this, it actually takes you to the tweets that it had actually tweeted. And furthermore, the red means that it's been, people are talking to that person, talking to that node, bombarding them with tweets. But the blue is what's supposed to be the opposite, which is people sending back. And you can tell here The presidency is not responding, it's just getting messages. People are sending in and expecting something in return. No hope. Parliament as well. It's like passive. They're waiting and people asking them to respond that they're not responding. And if you take the mentions, which is even a better feature because it has more flexibility, see yet a bigger node of people. And again, at this very center is the presidency. And all purely red, meaning that they only get but never respond back. And so this is empirical evidence of the way governments work. And the only way Parliament link was to the president. So the Parliament is now only contacting or replying to the presidency. So that's the bubble the governments are living in cybersphere, in Twitter. And to take you one more step to the power of this, we have integrated MeCoDEFI with Kumo. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Kumo, but it's a very popular social media platform, the network analysis platform that allows you to look much deeper into the area of social network analysis. So the two MeCoDEFI and Kumo are connected using data that's compatible, cross-compatible. So all you need to do is take the data and upload it, and then your Viola, you get all the data. So we did an experiment with Sona, and then this is what we got. This is the world of the presidency, and people, if you pull it left, they follow. That's the presidency. So it's usually that they're the leaders and then the followers, and then you find a huge gap. The rest of the people are out there somewhere in the islands. And so the beauty of this is that it actually helps you do the actual network analysis. Tells if you're familiar with the in-betweenness, eigenvector analysis, in degree, etc. So if you take one, highlight this, it shows where they're connected to. If you highlight this, it shows that all of these that are connected are the ones that send back. But if you take, for example, the presidency and click on it, and you get something called in degree. In degree means people bombarding, sending in. So you see in degree is 708, out degree is 0. That's the reality of the presidency. And you can take regular people sending in, you have them at the very bottom, out degree. They're shouting out, screaming, we'd like to communicate, no in degree, no one is responding back. And the same applies to government entities that are in there. And if you do an analysis of what's called social network analysis, you can find here a number of metrics that you can use. So one popular way of seeing is in degree. And so people who are, the presidency is the one that's people are appealing to, trying to send information to and communicate. Then you have news media, then you have the parliament, then you have the government. And so all of these, and then if you look at the total opposite, let's say the out degree, who are the people are sending, then you find the folks, activists, people who are interested in getting their message out. Do you see any government here? No. Do you see any entity that's responsible for communicating with the public? You don't see that. So this is in some way a portrayal of the reality of the traditional way of communication mapped on Twitter. It's empirical evidence showing where and how governments are failing. And I was tempting to do an EU analysis, but the last minute I decided not to. After all, the European Commission is our funder, so we'd like to appreciate them. But it might be a chronic problem with governments and institutions that they are unable to utilize technology in positive ways so that they communicate. And this is making the public think we are irrelevant. We are not actually engaged in the conversation. We are just allowed we are asked for questions, and then when it comes to answering back, it's deafening silence. And so, the tool is available. Go out there, download it, use it, and I can mingle with you afterwards on how this can be useful for various projects that you're handling. And that's from me. And go to Heather now.
And I put the link on Twitter.
And it's open source.
telling title.
Thank you so much for coming, and thanks, Wael, for introducing the case study that we're going to be delving into a bit more deeply today. So the title of this piece that is currently in development with the authors mentioned there is Dialogue of the Deaf. And it comes from a quote from Andrew Dobson, who's written a wonderful book called Listening for Democracy. And from all this wonderful data that Wael talked about earlier, we are trying to tell one story about this social media event, and that's the story I'm going to tell today. So the background to this, with the rise of network technology and social media in particular, we've witnessed a revolution in the ability to speak. Social media tools are accessible to everyone and enable everyone with access to those tools to have potential access to a worldwide audience and the ability to easily add their voice to campaigns and messages that they care about. And on Twitter, this ability to speak collectively is enabled practically by things like the retweet button or the like button, which increases the resonance of a particular message, right? We can also respond on Twitter to particular messages, and we can question others on Twitter, for example. We can provide support, and we can ask for further information. But the majority of messages on social media and Twitter in particular, that's what we've been talking about today, follow this very simple format, and that is the message and its simple endorsement or lack thereof. And that is how collective voice is able to originate on Twitter. Now, according to traditional democratic theory, man is a political being by virtue of his ability to speak. And according to democratic theory in Western tradition, a better democracy is a democracy in which more people are able to speak. And in doing so, they are able to give voice to their concerns, to speak about their place in the world, and for governments to then be able to take those voices into consideration when they make rules about how resources are distributed. And ultimately, this decides what we as a society are able to do and what it is we are able to be. Now, we've seen a peak of enthusiasm about the potential, the democratic potential of social media wane in recent years. And that's really about the question about whether social media is actually a blessing for democracy. Does social media serve democratic goals? How then have we gotten to the situation where the Oxford English Dictionary declared that post-truth is the word of the year, and that post-truth is being stimulated supposedly by our ability to speak on social media in particular? Now, in response to this big question, there's been a renewal of thinking and focus in the idea of listening, as the professor mentioned earlier. Listening not as opposed to speech, but in addition to speaking. And Andrew Dobson, in the book that I told you about, writes about the need for governments to listen to, very carefully listen to, and also listen out for previously unheard voices. And this is really stemming from this new, renewed thinking about what are the ideal forms of democracy that we're actually looking towards. And that's about participatory and dialogic democracy, rather than democracies in which every 4 or 5 years governments pretend to be listening to what their citizens are saying in order to capture votes. Now, this kind of disingenuous listening that governments often engage in is almost immediately derided as fake by citizens, because we've given up on politicians ever being able to do any service to the communities that they are supposed to represent. We are living through a time in which citizens are in revolt. They're using their voices on social media and elsewhere to throw out everything and everyone associated with the political order that they see as central to everything despisable about democratic politics. Now, analyzing this particular case, the South African State of the Nation address in 2015, was a case in point. The South African government on the 1st of February 2015 sent out a message, the presidency in particular, asking for citizens' input on what President Zuma would talk about in the State of the Nation address, which is basically an annual event in which the government will, or the president will outline what the strategic priorities are for the government and respond to some of the key problems. And the government, or the presidency basically asked this question on Twitter, and they asked it on Facebook. Now, President Zuma could do very well at this time with some political points, because it was at a time when he was at the center of a public financing scandal, and there'd been continued calls by citizens and by the media for him to pay back the money that he had spent on his Nkandla home, to which he generally had ignored their requests. Now, in response to this particular question on Twitter, we analyzed a few hundred of the discussions, and basically they fall into a few different categories. Some definitely did actually take it quite seriously and listed some of the problems that they felt were apparent in South African society that needed to be addressed. For example, crime. There's very little you can do in 140 characters, though, other than to list these issues. The majority asked President Zuma to say in his State of the Nation address that he would resign. Multiple said that he needed to pay back the money, which had become a hashtag, a rising hashtag in the South African Twitter sphere. Some were really heartfelt personal requests. There was one person who lived in a rural area in South Africa, and he asked the president if they could build a bridge between two rural communities in the Belvedere area. And the last category of tweets were really things like, he isn't really listening. Why do we even care? President Zuma is not reading these tweets, so this exercise is pointless. Now, in response, as Walid showed you, the government didn't really, it didn't make any direct responses and didn't really engage. They only picked out the responses that fit in the policy frame, and then didn't really address the key concerns that people had. They really just listed the issue and then declared it as a major success when they were then able to list the 25 policy issues that the dominant Twitter users had identified, and then thanked the public for the constructive suggestions, ignoring the others. Now, on the day of the State of the Nation address, they then were able to make tweets like these ones, where they said that the issue of crime is now being addressed by President Zuma, and thank you for those four Twitter users in that case who had suggested that that might be on the agenda. But what happened when the EFF, which is an opposition party in the South African Parliament, interrupted the president's speech, calling for the president to pay back the money? Now, what happened in the chambers was that numerous security personnel were called in. They had been expecting that something like this might have happened, and they physically removed the EFF opposition members from the chamber. The Democratic Alliance, which is the official political opposition, then moved out in solidarity, and that was really just left with the ANC and the president giving the final address. At the same time as this was happening, cell phone blocking technologies were used in the parliament, which meant that none of the press that were in parliament were able to actually tweet about what was happening. And there was also a disorder clause that was promulgated where the television crews were not allowed to show what was happening. So there's a lot of disarray and a lot of drama. Turns out, Twitter is great for drama. Because what happened, if you look here at the numbers, the volume of tweets over time, and if we think that in the run-up to the 12th of February, where we see that spike, we didn't even reach 1,000 tweets every day on the subject of SONA. But on the day, and we see it more in focus here, the public was demanding that the government bring back the signal in a roar that was heard in about 120,000 tweets. This was framed as a demand, a collective demand that could be made because of the ability on Twitter to reinforce this message and make it louder. And it also demonstrates the effectiveness of this kind of message and this kind of this kind of message on Twitter. In response, we have a saying in English: crickets. The South African presidency said nothing in response to this roar, and a day later we could see him playing golf. Now, what this case shows us is that governments really need to learn to listen, and that social media may not be able to engage people in reciprocal or in-depth dialogues about what matters, but there are actually opportunities for using social media to at least start a dialogue, as listening posts for dialogue, and for modeling good listening, especially among those of us whose voices are not always dominant. And one thing is for certain, like it or not, social media platforms are here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. And if governments are to justify their existence and improve their legitimacy, they will have to learn to listen on social media and find other platforms as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't know how you feel, but
Take part of the lunch maybe.
yeah, well, I think that we've been sitting here for a while now. We have a lunch session at the end where we can discuss Q&A. So I suggest that we take our break as planned. We come at 11:05 sharp start for the next session, please. We have coffee in the corner there. So please come back at 11:05. We will begin with our next session from INFOCORE. Thank you.
Sharpen the pointers here a bit. Can pause
Yeah.
So once again, if we could take our seats for the next session, please, so we can stay on time for lunch. Okay, we'll leave. 30 minutes. Okay, well, welcome to our next session, presentation of our second project, the European Union Frederick Project, INFOCORE. I'm not going to spend too much time introducing because it'll be done better. So we have two speakers today, so I'd just like to welcome our INFOCORE partners and welcome.
So thank you, everyone. We will move now to present some of our findings and our methodological approach to the complex issue of studying social media in violent context. So I'm here today with my colleague Sergios Lenis. He's our data scientist in the project. And our work package number 5 focuses on social media as a new online terrain of study. So what I want to do today is to present you an overview of our work, discuss how we selected the methodological tools that we decided to work with, and present a specific case in order to give you an example on the way we process and analyze our results. But why do we study social media and why are social media important? In our study, we highlight their role in transforming the global media landscape by redistributing the power of information and communication power among the involved actors, political actors, journalists, and citizens. Social media influence political participation and civic engagement, especially after the Arab Spring, in the contemporary complex geopolitical terrain, and in this way, they reshape politics as well as political discourse. Political campaigns also rely heavily on social media, and thus actors strive for attention and attention and visibility online. Our approach to social media networks is an online interactive arena that is evolving as we speak. We experience that online content becomes very fast obsolete and sometimes irrelevant too. And this has led us to change our data collection strategy a couple of times. As new developments were happening on the ground, and especially in the cases of Israel and Palestine, Burundi and Macedonia, we decided to focus on the most recent events that we could capture. So our terrain of analysis constitutes by the two most popular social networking platforms, mainly Twitter for the quantitative part and partially Facebook for the qualitative part. Bearing in mind the aims and design of our project, we started exploring social media and their users in different countries and different conflict cases. But very soon we realized that our field of study is just too complicated. We had language limitations, we had several problems in identifying users that were active online, we had identification and anonymity issues, and all these were challenging our selection criteria. And also taking into account the technical limitations when collecting data from social media platforms and the individualities of each networking tool, we decided to introduce a synthesis of quantitative and qualitative approaches. And at the same time, by examining the new social media reality, we noticed that beyond tweets and Facebook posts, there are deeper meanings that are connected to ideological, political, and social-cultural factors. An analysis of social media texts could not be limited to numbers or just linguistic means. It had to be linked to people, discourses, and contexts. At the same time, acknowledging the complex character and the different political, social, and historical context of each conflict, and also the individuality of the various events happening on the ground in each country, we decided to proceed with a multi-methodical analysis and try to incorporate different methodologies in order to understand the role of media in violent conflicts in a broader sense. So our research involves quantitative as well as qualitative approaches, ranging from content and network analysis to discourse analysis and social media ethnography. And this synthesis provides us with a holistic study that highlights the role of social media in the new polymedia canvas and contributes to the study of social media from a communication as well as social science perspective. As you have seen in the introduction, INFOCORE promises to deliver an analysis of conflict cases over 8 years. But for our work, we had to narrow down the conflict timelines due to several restrictions. First of all, the massive volume of data on social media and many technical restrictions for data acquisition, especially if you're working with historical social media text. We had to be highly selective on the conflict events that we focused on. Second, and more importantly, social media became increasingly popular and important as tools for information, communication, and mobilization purposes, especially after the advent of Arab Spring. So we mostly focused on conflict events that appeared as highly relevant for social media and were mainly after 2014. For the purposes of this presentation, we will focus on the Israel-Palestine conflict and demonstrate our approach. Here you can see a table of the selected timelines that we chose for our research work that involved around major events happening on the ground. Our aim is to discover how the debate concerning these specific events developed online and how the discourses were evolved, constructed, or even polarized. The case that we will present today is Operation Protective Edge, a long-lasting military operation launched by Israel in July 2014 in the Gaza Strip. Just to give you a brief information on the context, on the evening of June 12, 2014, 3 Israeli teenagers were kidnapped in the West Bank, and the Israeli leadership has placed the responsibility for the abduction on Hamas. On June 13th, the 3 corpses of the young people were found, and their murder was considered as a start of the chain of events leading to the major conflict, the military operation known as Operation Protective Edge. So during this specific time period, from July 8th until August 27th, 2014, we studied the diffusion of tweets across the study timeline and tracked the most popular hashtags that led the debate, and at the same time we monitor the networks that were formed online and the actions and interactions of the most prominent users on Twitter. Our first step in our approach is quantitative network and content analysis, but our research extends its scope by working mostly on network analysis to study the social relations between the actors and to be able to identify the actors' personal networks. So we started our analysis by developing a detailed timeline of the involved Twitter debate from July until September 2014 to capture the Twitter debate around Operation Protective Edge. And following the peaks in the Twitter activity, we can identify the key moments that were important for the conflict itself, and then check what was actually happening on the ground. We observed that the Twitter activity peaks around a very crucial event for the conflict, the Battle of Shujaya, showing that there is a consistency between what's happening on the ground and what is reported, discussed, and referred to online. But there are also several other peaks as the conflict evolves. We can see here the most trending hashtags that influence and led the debate both on national and international level. What we also find useful is to have an overview of the geolocation of the people tweeting on the events, and it shows that there is an activity from all over the world. In this heat map, the Twitter activity is better visualized so that we can understand where the heavier online activity came from. And as you can see, there are 2 main clusters, one in Israel and one across the East Coast, the US. What we were also able to, we can also learn a lot by looking at networks like this, where the most active actors are traced, and by active we mean the ones who produce the highest amount of tweets within the leading hashtags. And at the moment we're at the process of identifying these actors and decide how to deal with the sensitive issue of disclosing personal information on the actual users. What we were able to trace, and perhaps is also most interesting, is the ones who are the most influential actors, and by influential actors we mean the ones who are the most mentioned and referred to by other users during the conflict. Here you can see a list with the 20 most mentioned and interacted users. And while we were afraid initially that we would end up with a long list of bots, we were pleased to see that we could actually trace identifiable actors, ranging from political and institutional actors to media actors and NGOs. What we tried to do next was to verify if the users were actual people or just bots, using a rather sophisticated tool developed by Indiana University, which gives us some ground to evaluate the validity of each actor. But whereas this process can help us validate our initial assumption for this specific user, for example, he's expected that around 30% he is a person, but he's actually a bot. Then something like this happens. Netanyahu himself is considered to be 61% more possible to be a bot. Also, this is actually his personal account. So this actually highlights the restrictions that we have when we're employing such analysis, and of course it links to the very crucial phenomenon of computational propaganda that we should really take into account. By focusing on the subnetworks formed around a single actor, we can study in depth the various interactions that take place, as for example, United Nations, Guardian, or the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. But one important thing that we should have in mind when working with big data is that correlation is not the same as causation. So in other words, you can find something that goes up whenever this other thing goes up, or they're linked to each other, but this doesn't mean that one causes that or the other one. So if some of the findings, if they're just approached in a quantitative manner, they may lead to a logical fallacy that two events co-occurring together have a cause and effect relationship. And while content and network analysis provides us with a broad overview of a longer period in time and a big data set, it can lead us to the partially incomplete assumptions. So what we decided to do is that we also needed a closer look to our data to understand the deeper aspects of the conflict and analyze how major actors responded and acted during the studied events. And to do so, we employed critical discourse analysis as a systematic and more in-depth methodological approach. What critical discourse analysis allows us to do is to perform a more in-depth analysis of text and discourses. And by doing that, we explore relationships between text, genres, and discourses, as well as extra-linguistic and sociological variables. Historical context as well as situational frames. And while focusing on these relationships, we explore how discourses, genres, and change in relation to socio-political change, and reveal the main elements that establish a dichotomy between us and them, which is a very occurring theme when we talk about violent conflicts. However, it is not linked to these binary oppositions, as it emphasizes the situational as well as the socio-political and historical context. So in this regard, we decided to focus on the official public discourse developed by the Prime Minister of Israel, to focus on his Twitter account and study how he has used social media to articulate his political stance. So starting from a quantitative perspective, we can see here all the tweets posted by Netanyahu and identify the peaks in his Twitter discourse. And thus we can go back and then study study the content in depth. The reason we chose Netanyahu is because he chose to communicate the conflict through social media and legitimize his discourse, and legitimize through his discourse the political decisions made by his government. He also uses social media to a great extent to support his political stance to the international public opinion. And what is important to say that he actually has two Twitter accounts, one in which he tweets as Netanyahu, it's his personal account, he tweets in Hebrew, and the official account tweeting as the Israeli Prime Minister, which is 80% in English. So it's obvious that he appeals to an international audience. So for the purposes of showing you how discourse analysis works, we used as a starting point the address of Netanyahu to the UN General Assembly in September 2014, which shows this speech as a starting point to see how he justified the preceding Operation Protective Edge, and there was a clear reference in his September speech to what was happening in the country a few weeks before. So in his speech, he emphasizes the importance of security and safety, and through discourse analysis we can see that Netanyahu constructs a dichotomy between Israel and Palestine and legitimizes the Israeli tactics against Palestinian terrorism on the basis of securitization. So in other words, securitization is based on the discursive construction of a threat, which could lead to the reinforcement of specific political powers with the consent of those to whom the Speech Act is addressed. These abstracts, as you can see, the reference to Islamic terrorism and security issues and the metaphor of terrorism as cancer prompted us to emphasize as Netanyahu discourses, especially social media discourses on securitization and terrorism. The legitimation of the Israeli activity during Operation Protective Edge and prior his speech to the UN, we observe that he focuses on the representation of Hamas in his tweets. In August 2014, he posted this image in which he appeals to the public sentiment by showing the photos of the 3 murdered boys. In his discourse, he also builds an analogy between ISIS and Hamas and openly characterizes them as terrorists by utilizing the metonymic nomination terrorist tyranny to present the Palestinian regime. And thereafter, he refers to the Israeli government and explains that the members of the government decided to fight against Hamas to protect the Israeli citizens and ensure the security and safety of the people of Israel. So he creates through these tweets a discursive dichotomy between us, the innocent potential victims of Hamas, and them, the inhuman terrorists. In addition, he implicitly criticizes those states and leaders that accuse Israel of attacking Palestine through his tweets, and he explains that the terrorism has no borders. So he discursively legitimizes the attacks as a defense of the Israeli people and develops his argument via the topos of threat, a threat that is established by a cruel enemy that can be dangerous for any country. By studying Netanyahu's tweets, we also see that the visual element is very important. He has a systematic use of infographics like these that illustrate his argumentation in a very visually explicit way. This is also another very typical example, but we will not stop our analysis here. What we aim to do as a third step is to complement our research with material that we have obtained from the fieldwork that our other research partners have carried out in the project, mainly interviews and focus groups, so that we can correlate the data. Our aim through this analysis is to combine different methodological approaches that can complement each other so that our data can be triangulated and that we can have a broader overview of how social media could be studied and could be better understood in violent conflicts. So as a last point, I would like to share with you some of the considerations of our future research and not conclusions, because we cannot claim that we're there yet. First of all, it is important to regularly go back to the question if social networking media are being used as technological means or media that produce content and distribute content. And I think it's indicative that Mark Zuckerberg had to publicly state a few days before that they're a technological company and not a news company. Further than this, what we aspire to do is to study the possible patterns of homophily that emerge on social media. Social network analysis can help us a lot in this, in monitoring how interactions demonstrate strong homophily patterns between the users and between polarized groups, forming isolated echo chambers. In other words, to what extent do we reaffirm what we already want to think about through what we post on social media? And how in-group and out-group affiliations are formed in this way. Another point that we would like to raise is that there is an apparent different pace between how media work and how democracy works. We had long discussions with our stakeholders 2 days before. They were really concerned how they could, sell peace negotiations and democracy, a word that was often used. How they were asking how we could make them look more sexy to the politicians that they represent. And I think it's important not to try to repackage peace negotiations and democracy as sexy. I think the situation is much more complex, and peace negotiations could never fit into the traditional or social media news cycle anyway. So I think that reconciliation cannot be found on social media or traditional media, but we can definitely learn a lot by studying social media content, monitoring the debate online, and start recognizing the patterns that emerge during the involvement of the conflict, during the phases in which the conflict is fueled again. So as a final remark, I would like to stress that when we started working on the project and writing the theoretical background, we had acknowledged 3 different roles for social media as direct and interactive communication channels, as alternative information providers and sources, and self-organized participatory networks. And I think that after working in this work package for almost 3 years, I keep wondering if we should also start thinking of them as social perception media. And I think we will also pay some work in that as well. So thank you. As a last part, we will have a short presentation presenting some of the challenges that we have encountered when we were working with big data in the various conflicts that we have selected. So Sergius will give us an overview of the different problems and limitations that we have encountered.
Briefly, the 3, we'll make it a little shorter. So we are creating some ego networks. All the actors are connected to your network. So that was not very useful in our research. So we continued with Twitter. In Twitter, you can, the data you collect, you can create a new network or using the characteristics like hashtags or mention or followers. So you can create some networks like that. That's a hashtag, concurrent network. Now, to skip it and make it shorter. The main challenges we encounter is a brief list of challenges. So, to start, the abbreviations. We found that to be very challenging. They have not found any solution about that. So about hunt in Twitter may be have a nice day. So when you're making a readout of the text in the Twitter, you can find those words and you can assume they mean something else. The other big challenge is that the Twitter text is about 140 characters, bound to be that amount of characters, but many users have found the way to overcome that, to bend that rule by making what they want to say a photo and post it afterwards, like to this one or to this one. It's a big one. And even there are some applications like to enjoy that you can do it online. You can write your own text about 100 characters, and after that you write what you want to be in the photo. So you get that thing. The other main challenge was the languages, because, as is already said, you can search in many languages, but the Twitter itself makes auto-translation. So if you search for Macedonia, you will get one tweet that is in English, but you will also get some in other languages like Arabic or I don't know. whatever you can find in that meaning. The last and very demanding challenge is the concurrent event. So if you make a search that's very unconstrained, you might end up like in this example. We were searching for tweets for the elections in Israel, and we get the first one is in elections in Israel. The second one is about 2016 elections somewhere. The third one is in Haute Savoie elections, and etc. So we get a lot of noise in our data set. On the other hand, there are some limitations because we are using the API of the Twitter to communicate, and that's the really problematic condition because, okay, I will not go into many technical deep in the technical problems, but they divided the time in 15 minutes window, etc., and that ends up that you will not be able to collect some data like the followers, because if you try to collect the followers of a network, a really big network, you'd end up to have to need some enormous time to collect it. Okay, and as a conclusion, I can give some best practices we have found already. It's better to plan your search strategy. Try to identify exactly what you want from the internet, from the Twitter, because the database of the Twitter is huge, so you might not try to collect whatever there is. Try to make a very constrained search. Create a sophisticated query, like if you are interested in the elections in Israel, make it like Israel or Palestine and elections and something, and make it very constrained. Get the data from the Twitter and try to identify if it is okay. If it's sufficient, then okay. If you think that the data you get was very poor, try to remove some constraints. Remove Knesset, for example, and try again. But don't try to do it elections from the start. You end up with a data set that's huge and probably will not be usable. And on the data cleaning, all those appear. If you have a bad data set, a very polluted data set, you will have a lot of time to clean it. About the bot recognition and removal, we finally found another way to try to recognize and remove them. We try to use some rules, like because they have to have some characteristics, like they have a lot of followers, and they following very few. So we found some users that have that irregularity, and then try to save some time. So I think that's it.
If we may add something to that before we conclude, what I could say as an overview when working with Twitter data was that in all of the conflicts we had to go into a retrospective search. So we had to obtain historical data, and Twitter, of course, has many restrictions. What we try to do when we start working with the conflicts is get a quote from GNIP, which is actually the company that Twitter now owns, and they handle all the historical, all the archives of Twitter. And just to give you an indication for the specific time period that we presented today and that we wanted to study, the amount that was requested was $22,000. So, you know, you can imagine, yeah, the vast amount of, you know, market that is out there for people who want to do research on Twitter. That's it.
Thank you very much.
My presentation is.
Actually, we're pretty much on time, Matthew, so you don't have to worry too much. I mean, we've only got 5 minutes over. So final presentation for research is from MeCoDEM from VOX-Pol. And what we will do is we will see how the situation looks for discussion, and if we have a few questions for the projects, we can maybe pool them together for 5 minutes at the end of the last session and ask them to the set people as they sit here. Otherwise, we can take it over to lunch. But welcome.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I will try to keep it as quick as possible, but I set out quite an ambitious task for myself, so I hopefully will manage to do everything within 20 minutes. And the reason I'm saying this is that a lot of the questions raised today and raised in the previous panels are also issues that VOX-Pol has been dealing with, specifically both in terms of methods and in terms of the research that we are doing in terms of how does the internet contribute to extremist terrorist activity and so forth. So what I'll try to do today is have a brief introduction of the work that VOX-Pol has been doing, focusing on 3 separate projects. I was initially going to present only one project here, but because we are doing the presentation anyways in a few weeks, and the report is going to come out, so I'll end with some teasers regarding some areas that are coming. So hopefully that'll raise some of the discussion that we can raise towards the end of, if we have time for discussions. And so, because of the kind of tight time frame, I'll jump directly into it. And as I mentioned, VOX-Pol is a network that looks at violent political online extremism and has partners in different universities. And because of the diversity of different kinds of research that is going on, there is a lot of things that could be talked about. So I have decided to focus on 2 themes that I think are relevant to most of the other discussions we have been raising today. So one is the research that we have been doing on the online behavior of convicted terrorists. The second is a methodological research. So the first one has been done together with University College of London. And the second case study or example that I will present, it has to do with big data and understanding of avatars, specifically in the biggest far-right or white supremacist forum called Stormfront. So I'll look at some of the methods of how we can even include images into our analysis and at the current point. And the final is what the name of the presentation today was, on the mapping of the extreme far-right and ISIS networks in the EU. So I'll again present some teasers, some points, and given how contemporary the topic is, especially after the Trump elections, I will try to come up with some kind of things that we hopefully can have a good discussion on afterwards. So I'll jump directly into the first case study, which is it's based on a book that has been published already by VOX-Pol and is freely accessible online. So if anybody's interested in what is called What Are the Roles of the Internet in Terrorism, and this has been done together with Paul Gill, Emily Corner, Amy Thornton, and Maura Conway from VOX-Pol. And the thing. Paul Gill just announced about a few weeks back, that he has been given access to all the police data regarding convicted or accused people who have used internet in terms of terrorism. So he actually has a very big chunk of empirical data to work on. So this is based on his previous research, where they also had access to police data of looking at how, in fact, or what kind of patterns can be found in the activities of convicted terrorists. So Gill begins with the problem that there are too many indicators of what do we exactly mean by online terrorism, or what do we mean by online extremism. There's too many indicators. All of these are treated equally. There's no way of weighing them or structuring them or measuring them. There's an absence of a baseline, so we don't know what would be activity that is non-extremist in a way. So it's, if you look at this from a very purely scientific and research perspective. So there's no understanding of factors that protect people from becoming extremists or acquiring extremist tendencies or ideologies. There's no understanding of how this risk in fact crystallizes, so how do people in fact become increasingly and quickly extremized. There's a lumping of multiple different things on the same category. There's no understanding of the time kind of sequence of how it happens. So what they did as a part of trying to understand was the big problem with a lot of the work on terrorism studies and on violent online political extremism is the fact that there is very little empirical data that has been used to do this kind of work. So I'm not going to read the whole quote, but he said of the 200 abstracts they looked at in their study, only 6.5% utilized any form of data. So primary data was utilized in just 2% of the studies. So what this means that a lot of the conjectures that are made are actually not really based on empirical evidence or empirical findings. So this is something that they have been trying to work on, trying to understand better. So the different kind of things that go under this general category of online radicalizations include things like forms of learning and forms of interaction. So ideology, opting for violence, choosing a target, preparing an attack, overcoming hurdles to do something, and also reinforcing belief, seeking legitimization, disseminating propaganda, attack signaling, and recruitment. So you can see how under this category lots of different practices and behaviors are being lumped under the same idea of kind of terrorist online radicalization. So what they did was they wanted to test the hypothesis that if the internet is purely causal or if it causes some form of activity, so we might expect affordances or how the internet affects or influences behavior be similar across different cases. And this would be something that could be in a way scientifically tested. And or if the internet is a facilitator that it helps, then there would be some difference or diversity between different types of groups in terms of how they use the online or the internet for their own activities. So what the study did was it looked at 227 convicted UK-based terrorists and looked at and coded all the online related behavior. I think there was about 200 codes that they came up with different kinds of behavior and what would be and how that could be then analyzed between 1990 and 2014. And then they performed a series of bivariate and multivariate analysis. And this is technical stuff in terms of political science, but basically it's looking at patterns and correlations between different variables in the data set. And the findings that came out of this was that in fact the extreme far right is 3.39 times more likely to learn online in terms of attack planning and 2.41 times more likely to communicate online than jihadis. Those who targeted government were 4.5 times more likely to learn online than those targeting civilians. And those who use improvised explosive devices are 3.34 times more likely to learn online. And the lone actors are 2.6 times more likely to learn online than members of a cell. So this basically just shows the kind of diversity of different things that happen in terms of what is considered online radicalization. So what Gil suggests, and this is the work that he's currently also doing for VOX-Pol, is that don't just focus on what the internet affords offenders, but also try to understand what do they need, what do they seek from the internet activity, or what do they seek to achieve by going on different websites and finding whatever the different things they are trying to achieve. And there's also a high correlation between what people do offline and online activities. So if you are part of a social group offline, you would be quite likely to be part of that also online. So it's very hard to differentiate what is considered offline activity and what is considered online activity. And then there's the urgent need to disaggregate or between and compare across different terrorist subtypes. And again, the case here is between the extreme far right and the jihadis. And what he says, focus on preventing opportunism. So these are some of the kind of things that can be done with empirical data in terms of the first question. But because we are in a bit of a rush, I'm going to jump directly into the second case study, which is the ladies of Stormfront. And how most of you are not probably familiar with Stormfront, but it's the biggest online forum for extreme far right and white supremacists. So what some of my colleagues at VOX-Pol wanted to do is look at the relationship between avatars in Stormfront and the user and the content that they're posting. And they wanted to see that if users from the same demographics are also users who are sharing certain extremist viewpoints and pick certain kinds of visual representation of them in avatars. And the testbed was about 26,000 avatars from Stormfront, which is the white nationalist, white supremacist, and neo-Nazi internet forum. And also, as a sub-question they were interested in, which is very seldom addressed in the research on online radicalization, is the idea of gender. So they wanted to look at especially how women's involvement can be looked at in terms of this avatar selection and content on Stormfront. The assumption being that the denizens of the extremist sphere are assumed, rightly or wrongly, to be largely men, which is again an untested assumption. So again, these are examples from Stormfront where you can see different kind of comments that they post there and things like, I don't post my activities online because we are constantly stalked by the antis, but I have been actively involved in the American white nationalist movement for roughly 10 years. And so forth. I have beautiful white children. So this is it's often a very kind of an ideological, not necessarily extreme violent discussion that goes on there. So the data collection that our colleagues, and these are colleagues at the University of Amsterdam worked, they collected 2 million user posts. They collected images from 26,000 avatars, 21,000 profile pictures, and 10,000 users with both avatar and the profile pictures, and then finally 1,500 avatars associated with the For Stormfront Ladies Only forum. And again, I'm not going into the technicalities of this. We've already had very interesting work done on social network analysis. So basically what University of Amsterdam is doing is what is called multimedia semantic analysis. So they use machine learning to come up with semantic concepts involved in images. So they have their own computer clusters, so they've done training on, for instance, 100 million images to see how they can identify certain elements and semantic elements extracted from those images. So they train them and they come up, so the image there you can see would include concepts such as military personnel, weapons, military base, and truck. And these are automatically detected by the algorithms within their system.
Maybe beards.
Well, beards, so like, that would something that would have to be suggested. So again, these are like automatically detecting visual concepts in Avatar. So you can see that the system is reasonably good at detecting certain kinds of easily distinguishable concepts such as tanks and guns and military personnel and sunglasses, I guess, was one of them. And so the idea was then to let's train a classifier to discriminate between avatars of users that post for Stormfront Ladies only. So what are the kind of gendered avatars that we would find on the extreme white extremist forum, and then from the users posting to other categories. So what we see is there are of course big differences, and also all kinds of interesting questions that have not been addressed in research that has looked at online extremism. And so again, some results, and this is again just to prove some of the kind of work that is being done. So it's not that important in terms of finding, especially for the European Commission, that women like a lot of cats, but it's more of a proof of concept in terms of like the technologies or the techniques that can be also used. Or then there's a lot of stuff. Dating advice includes dresses and dresses of women and so forth. But as a proof of concept, just backstepping for a bit, there's what the University of Amsterdam colleagues have also done is kind of a search engine for extremist material, which we have been using. So it actually has indexed millions of posts on Stormfront, which is now available for researchers, where we can actually access them and look at different things like images, and it also does some of the automatic classification of images. So there is a lot of really interesting possibilities for looking at patterns and things like that. So anyways, takeaway messages. The ladies of Stormfront use avatars depicting the concept traditionally perceived as more feminine. There's a lot of potential or promise in terms of going beyond social network analysis or textual analysis or only Twitter-based analysis to look at even multimedia content and images, which is a new. If you look at, say, social media activity, a very big chunk of it is now posting images and the problems that come with that. And then the ongoing research that you can do comparative, again, the need for comparative large-scale analysis of topics and how is this by different user groups, and also by different groups involved in different types of extremism. So, as a final kind of teaser, as a final kind of example of the work that VOX-Pol has been doing, so I will also briefly discuss the work that we have been doing on mapping now extreme far-right and ISIS social media networks. And this is a project that we are hoping to publish in the next couple of weeks, so there'll be a public report coming out on this. And it's also something that was mentioned about the European Internet Forum, so some of the work will hopefully probably be presented there also. So the idea is to better understand comparatively different kinds of extremist social networks in the EU, extreme far-right and ISIS in particular, and the assumption that there's been a kind of a shift in terms of this moving into encrypted forums because of the big crackdown by social media companies. And also then trying to see, okay, let's look at this from a very kind of reasonably simplistic perspective of let's map out the social media users that exist, or we can find that exist on especially Twitter. So the problem that we faced initially or immediately is that how do you identify when somebody's an extremist? So in terms of the extreme far right, we have the problem between populism and extremism. So somebody can support both. So how do we know that somebody would be labeled as an extremist? How do we decide that this activity would be a representative sample of extremist behavior online? So the sort of thinking had to go into that. And in terms of the ISIS, the problem was that because of the whack-a-mole that was mentioned earlier, it's very hard to find people who would be explicitly supportive of ISIS. So we found a lot of researchers, a lot of journalists, we found a lot of, but the so-called fanboys or true supporters were usually shut down or their accounts discontinued in less than a day. So it was a research challenge of how do we identify these users that we want to look at. So we came up with quite a complex layering sampling methodology to actually try to be as kind of confident about that this is a sample that we want to look at in terms of these different types of extremist activity online. So we looked at seed accounts based on some of the researchers that work in these domain fields. We extracted all their followers. We run through about 5 iterations of social network analysis, where we looked at the most central important people, their different communities, networks, and then we selected manually. These are the, and so on and so forth, until we felt confident that this would be something that we wanted to look at. Also, in terms of the extreme far right, the problem was a lot of American accounts are very influential, as I will show later in the European debate. So we also try to exclude some of the American accounts or accounts belonging to obvious political parties or populist parties. And also in the European context, the issue was trying to find accounts from all EU member states, which was a challenge because Eastern Europe is not very active on social media compared to other countries. And also data collection. Then we did the standard Twitter ABI stuff and collected both the latest 30,000 tweets, and then also collected the comparative sample for over a week from the streaming API for Twitter. So, and then we looked at some of the things that already have been mentioned here today, like network level analysis, user level analysis. One of the interesting questions we are interested in is what is called outlink level analysis, which looks at where do people link to, because if the assumption is that people are going underground, so where are they going underground? Are there any patterns of people saying, we can't say this here, but come to Telegram, for instance? So that was one of the, and then we look at contents, including hashtags and also like hashtag relationships. And we did also topic modeling on the content, but this is not going to make this report because it's a bit tricky and a bit technical, so we can talk about that more also. So anyways, here's some teasers and some samples, and I'm not going to explain too much about this. I'm just going to present them as a base of discussion. So this is actually a social network community mapping of ISIS supporters. I've also taken out the names, so because we want to keep things anonymous. So it shows how there are different clusters, and in fact, the so-called true fan voice is a reasonably small cluster within this. But it's a reasonably tight network. There is the Iraqi-Syrian cluster, and then there's a lot of the blue cluster. There includes a lot of journalists, analysts, and people who report on the issues. And a very simple hashtag kind of cloud that we did. So you can see some of the debates which are expected, include like Syria, Islamic State, ISIS, Aleppo. So it's a reasonably accurate representation of some of the debates that are going on. And you can see how important Syria and some of these issues have become there. And also what we did was we tried to conceptually map, and we can't see the relationships, I guess, on this clear enough. But this is actually a conceptual mapping of some of the different terms that are being used with starting from Syria as being the node. So it's different terms and how they relate to that are linked to the most popular hashtag. So we see different terms, and these are based on what is called hashtag co-occurrence. Again, some of the things, and we'll be presenting a lot of this stuff much more in the report, so I'm not going to go that much into detail. In the discussions, I can give more details if people are interested in, and also keeping aware of time. So, and what I found the most interesting also, because I'm researching the extreme far right, so here we have a mapping of what came out of the extreme far right in Europe, of different countries. And I've labeled some of the different clusters there just so you can see the picture. The sample was about 30 times bigger than what we found for ISIS. So we had a challenge of having too many accounts to look at. So again, you can see that there's a lot of language-based clusters, but then there's a very big influence, especially around the Trump elections and especially around what has become called alt-right in the US and also in the UK. So there's a very big kind of white supremacist neo-Nazi cluster that exists that combines all of these different, so even different regional clusters in Spain, France, and Germany are also somehow linked to this. So there are people who are linking both local debates and domestic and more kind of international debates. So some of the more hardcore white supremacist people would be the ones that blew in the middle. So it includes Scandinavians, it includes, of course, Germans are not very present there because it's not allowed in Germany or Austria to have such sympathies. But what I found really interesting is, especially given the contemporary events, was the alt-right white supremacy influence in, and we purposefully tried to not include this in the sample, so it still became one of the most dominant clusters. And you can see that also the hashtags used, that the most dominant hashtag being used is white genocide. And you can see there are some of the things, how it links then to Alternative for Deutschland, Pediga, and more local debates around immigration, around refugees, and then there's a lot of regional debates in Spain and France and other parts. And we also did some of the mapping, so I can talk about this much more in detail in person later on, but so things that link to white genocide. And what I, however, found the most interesting, that if you look at the kind of co-occurrences or relationship between different concepts in the tweets, one of the most kind of central that unites different debates was the concept of Islam. So we can see again some of the debates that Islam actually brings into the multilingual debates, because a lot of people partially because it's a term that is across languages, but also in terms of networks, Islam is one of the, Islam immigration is one of the key themes that is being discussed in all these things by having it linked to other things. And there were many other interesting kind of findings which I'm not going to present here, but I don't know if I want to even put in the report. But anyways, we can discuss this off record after that, because given that it's Brussels. So finally, just moving to some discussion points, so we will have some time for debate afterwards, hopefully. So anyways, one of the most interesting findings that came out of, and these are very tentative, so don't take this as something that should be published at this point. So it is that the ISIS accounts have either they have been cracked down or they have moved to private or encrypted channels. So very difficult to find. The whack-a-mole has been so effective that they have been gone down, and this has been confirmed also by other research, such as the research done by Berger, who said that. So, and the extreme right on the contrary are very active, and they seem to be also buoyed, or they seem to be encouraged by the recent events. So there seems to be some kind of a movement going on. And so this is partially shows how the Anglo-American Twitter sphere debates and methods have become also influential in EU, and especially around the elections and the alt-right. And okay, our report will be out in a few weeks, so hopefully we'll have something more kind of systematic to present at that point. But I wanted to end up on this note that, and I don't know if any of you have been following any of the online debates. So this is a standard representation of the alt-right. So if you're doing some ethnography of the far-right forums, and if you spend time there, you can see that there is a very concerted movement going on. So this is one thing that I found as a very interesting thing to kind of conclude with this, that now they are very consciously trying to look, okay, we had Brexit, we had the Trump, now we're going to the Austrian elections, then there's the French elections, and so forth. So they're like, okay, we have 11 more elections coming in Europe. So they're kind of, so there's actually a concerted movement of people trying to get involved. So this was something I found interesting, just so the kind of themes and memes that have been used in the US a lot have also kind of started coming to Europe recently, much more dominantly. So anyways, the policy recommendation, the recommendation as I started or prefaced the presentation, that we need more research. And we need more research about things are fast changing. We need a lot of reliable data and also analysis that is actually looks at empirical data and provides analysis based on that. So there's a lot of work that doesn't really have too many assumptions about what is going on. So we need to have detailed research what in fact is going on. We don't know what the influence of the alt-right, for instance, will be, because it's happening so quickly and it's happening in a very contemporary space. And so VOX-Pol has been trying to do this, and I'm sorry if the end seems a bit like a promotion. It's because I'm a fellow and I was asked to present this stuff, so I'm promoting some of the work on VOX-Pol, but the great work that VOX-Pol has been doing is trying to broaden some of the debates on online terrorism and radicalization, beyond violent jihadism, to deepening methodologic, to also interview surveys, online ethnography, upscaling big data, coming up with methods like I mentioned with avatars, and also doing interdisciplinary, and also developing lots of tools that will hopefully become also open source, including like machine learning tools for understanding extremist content and other things. So a lot of things going on, and this is probably my last presentation as a research mobility fellow, so I will recommend to anybody who wants to get involved in the work that there's also funding for research fellows who are interested in this kind of work, that you can actually go visit one of the institutions and try to get more involved and to do this kind of research that I've tried to explain that we think is needed to understand this issue, the challenges and the problems a lot better. So on that note, I think we might have some time for conversation.
Thank you.
So here are some details about VOX-Pol, and you can find information on the website, and also you can send an email or talk to me after.
Leave it up. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to just, okay, two people already have their hands up. Okay, I know we had to skip, so we have 3 questions right here. Let's take these first 3, some people have, and then we'll see how far into lunch we get, and if it looks like we're spilling over, we'll continue our discussion over there. So please, right here, let's begin. And this question to any of the 3 research groups. Let's not just have VOX-Pol, but any of the 3 INFOCORE and MeCoDEM as well. So let's begin. Here, you had a question right here. Yeah. Yes. A microphone, yes. Is there a mic?
Is this one?
Just step up here.
It's good? No, it's not. This is one.
Hi. I'm Katia Munoz. I'm a management consultant, but also an independent inbound marketing strategist. And my question is, what about Snapchat? Because it's growing, it's in social media, it's becoming a very strong player, perhaps not yet in Europe, but in other markets, but I foresee that that will be the case. What about Snapchat, for instance?
This one. There is two challenges that come with that. One is that unless they are public forums, it's very difficult to actually do research on them. One is for ethical reasons. So if there are not public forums, there are a lot of ethics concerned about researching Snapchat through a lot of ethical committees. And the second is that a lot of the research tends to move towards more ephemeral web, which is this that doesn't leave as many traces. So it's going to also cause a lot of research challenges. And the reason that we have all been focused on Twitter for the most part here has to do with the fact that Twitter is the most easiest platform to research. You can look at Facebook public pages, that's something that has been done. But once you go into any of these non-public forums, it's virtually impossible to know what's going on unless you go undercover and do things. And that's it's a different question that entirely.
Yeah, we had two more. Yeah, we have a couple more at the back. Next. If you move a little closer, I think we have.
Yeah.
So
It's not on.
That does what?
Turn it on.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. My name is Bianca Barn. I'm the team leader of an EU-funded project on public diplomacy, funded by the Foreign Policy Instrument. And I'm very concretely looking to use some of these tools in our project. I hope this question is of relevance to some people here, and if not, we can maybe also continue afterwards. The question is, we need something where we analyze the impact of activities in social sphere, not only Twitter, but we can focus on Twitter, and possibly also to identify influencers. So in terms of who do we want to reach out to, who do we want to engage with, and potentially I've also been told they can sometimes, some of these softwares can be used even as a contact management tool. So my question is, out of those three elements or things that need to be done, so contact management, identification of influencers, and the impact of actual concrete activities, debates, conferences, and this is for all panelists, the others as well, is there a specific tool that you would advise? There are a few that have come up. I know that there are some free ones, there are some that cost quite a lot. I've been in touch with people who are asking for some tool that's about 7,000 euros. So basically a general advice, how much do we need to invest in it, and what tools have you had the best experience with?
Well, I can quickly respond to this and then open up to some of the other people who have been doing great work in using different tools. So there is a trade-off between how much you want to spend time learning things and how much you want to pay. So all the tools are available that you need. The question is that how much, or do you have resources or support to use them? Because you can, a lot of the work that we have been doing is done together with computer scientists. So it's basically they customize it, they do it manually, a lot of things in use. Whereas you have a lot of private companies who provide that kind of research. In the end, people are looking at exactly the same things. So it's there's no rocket science behind it. There are certain things that you can use, and then it comes down to how do you use them, what kind of questions you raise, and then also how much time do you want to invest as an institution to learn some of the tools. But I'll open this to some of the other people if they have any recommendations.
Waleed, did you want to?
No, I support what you said.
Okay. Well, yeah, the back. Where was the microphone? There we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, citizens. I hope that it will be given the opportunity in the center of democracy here to speak a little bit more about three things.
We'll see how democratic we can
Which
be.
mainly they are being addressed to Mrs. Hitherford. I'm Andrew Skarlaftis. I present Eco Waves movement and the Ecumenists. It's pan-European and Mediterranean movement. We are against the globalists. We are presenting a new vision, because the title here is Utopian Visions, which we are speaking about. We don't speak for dystopian futures. but we speak also for pragmatic policies. And for the utopian visions, I have to mention that the Mrs. Heather told about politics that politics is somebody who can speak. What about those who cannot speak? Because Aristotle gave the idea about what is a politician, and all of us were politicians according to Aristotle because we live in polis, in cities. So democracy exists only when we have tirage au sort. We have only sorting procedures. Otherwise, it is oligarchy. Here we have oligarchies all around us, which is a kind of democracy, but they are not pragmatic democracies, according to Aristotle. So our vision is, of course, not to have one global governance, but to have 11. This is not for the hour, of course. And the pragmatic thing is that about the question of blessing or curse about the social media, of course, it's a blessing because they give us the opportunity, and me especially, to which I face a lot of difficulties to present our ideas the last 8, 10 years here in Brussels. But also there is a curse because they leave a lot of unemployment for the spy community, since the spy to everybody, even the extremists, the white, whatever they are, they create fear. The fear was the terrorists in the beginning. Now they have the rightists, the extremists, or whatever they call. When we are all citizens inside the democracy, democracy has a spiritual and free speech for every citizen, who is a citizen. And the other ways, they are created by us. We know from ISIS that ISIS cannot exist. I'm working on the commission on the technical committees about the internet, because we say that we have to make also the European internet the CNET in order to keep our privacy. And we know that ISIS, they cannot exist on the media. When we control the satellites, we control the arms. Where did they find the arms? How they communicate? When we control the 2 data centers in USA, they control everything, even if we have cryptography or whatever. So we don't speak on reality. We want to give to the citizens the European and Mediterranean ancient traditional way of democracy, which is the direct democracy in science and in ecology. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have time maybe for 1 or 2 more questions. Yeah, 1 more, and then we can probably shift over to lunch.
Yes, it's Ragnar Skreje again. So thank you for interesting talks. But small comment, may I suggest that next time perhaps you set aside more time for discussion, because I think the time is inadequate considering the really interesting and complex issues you have raised here.
That's everywhere.
Well, we have attempted to have the 1 hour lunch session at the end for sort of more.
Yeah,
we realize that, but we have.
It's not the same. Lunch discussion isn't the same.
No, it's not the same.
We talked about echo chamber effect here earlier. Also, I don't think that you really have addressed the questions that the project aims to investigate. Such as, does media coverage during democratization conflicts contribute to polarization and escalation? I saw that Serbia is one of the countries you have done fieldwork in, and I haven't noticed anything about Serbia in the material today, but maybe I missed it. But I would suggest that you, first of all, you make more clear who you are as scientists and where you come from. I mean, the theoretical perspective. What's your field of research, each of you? It's all kind of graphical and fancy, but what do all these dots on the screen actually, what can they tell us scientifically? That would be interesting, and I also think that you should have a more, and I know it's funded by the EU, but the EU is really an important actor in these different democratization scenarios, and that which should be raised the question should be raised: what role does the EU play in each of the conflicts? And I have material from Georgia, and I can share it. If there had been time, I could tell you more about my findings, but there isn't time. So you talked about Ukraine. You talked about neo-Nazis. Sorry, I rushed ahead here, but my point is that the EU, it could be argued that the EU, through its actions, is actually part of the problem there that you describe in your findings about neo-Nazis and Stormfront, by encouraging this revolution in Ukraine. And also, you started out, Mr. Boland, you started out with convicted terrorists, but towards the end there, you had Trump supporters on the screen, and I mean, where's the definition of an extremist in that picture? But
Can I answer the two questions?
thank you for
before I forget the previous ones. So,
Sure. But thank you for interesting talks,
Okay.
and good luck with
and
your
thank you
project.
for the good questions.
What do you take those 2 points again?
I just the 2 points quickly, and then we can move on. It's well, I have no idea of Ukraine because it's not part of the thing that we have been doing. So that's a debate.
Ukraine isn't one of the topics on Stormfront.
It's not one of the topics that have been very active, and it's something that should be discussed, I guess, in a different context because it hasn't been a part of the research. So I'm not capable of answering that question. The second question about which was about the difference between, which I think I mentioned at the beginning, the difficulty of differentiating between extremism and populism was exactly based on that point. So obviously that's an issue, and obviously it's a very, especially online, the lines are very blurry. So the question that who in fact is a non-parliamentary extremism, who is a populist, is a very blurry one. So the reason that there were multiple different things, that's what the data came out of the data based on the best we could. But then we will never know how it will be virtually impossible to find people who are planning terrorist attacks and will not say anything about it. So you have to work with something that you have accessible. So yeah, it's a challenge, and we tried in terms of the 5-layer methodology the best we could to identify the ones who would portray more extremist content. So that's why it was not about neo-Nazis and white supremacists. However, they are very linked to the Trump debate, so it's you can't also deny that fact that a lot of people are involved in both. So it's there's a lot of overlaps also. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. Sorry, I really apologize that to cut off the discussion, but we're 20 minutes over. We have a limited amount of time left here in the room for our discussion afterwards. I realize there's some other questions, but I would just like to thank everybody, A, for attending. The turnout has been excellent today. And B, to all of our speakers and the project representatives, and especially our 2 keynote speakers, both Belinda and Wael. And I would like to thank everybody for coming. We have food over here at the side. We have the ability to stay here until 1 o'clock to speak with each other. So I'd just like to thank all of our speakers today for really excellent presentations.